Wendy makes a decision. This, at least, could be said about Snowball. The little thing curled up on Wendy's neck and breathed his soft, wet breath on her cheek, while she lay on her bed, dry-eyed and in state. Nana sat loyally on the floor nearby, perhaps withholding her disdain for the new interloper in view of her mistress' distress. "Ireland," Wendy finally whispered. "I don't want to go to Ireland. Unless, maybe, I would if I got to go in an airship. Or if I went by regular ship while chasing pirates. Or if I wasn't alone. If I was brought there by Peter Pan." This time, hearing her voice aloud didn't make her braver at all. "Peter Pan," she repeated bitterly. "Peter Pan, who only visited when I couldn't see him. Peter Pan, who left his shadow and never came back for it. Who never came back for me." She turned her head to look out the window, but all she saw was gray. The same gray that was inside her head. The two reached out to each other like sensing like. Wendy closed her eyes, severing the connection, but it was still gray behind her closed lids. What had happened? Somehow her life had gone from heady days of playing games with Michael and John and telling stories about pirates too. Passing time until they came home, and then there were no more pirates anyway. Oh, come on. Something had slipped out of her hands. There would be no more pirates of any sort in her future. No fairies. No Peter Pan. No Neverland. Just banishment to another family in another drearily real country. And there, and then back home, the same social mistakes, misery in a crowd, boys who probably didn't like her anyway. She sighed and looked at Snowball. "Pretty doggy," she said, giving him a pet. "When they gave you to me, they were only trying to make me happy. They really do think this nannying abroad, this gothic situation, would be good for me. But I don't like gothic novels, Snowball. They're dreary. I suppose it could have been worse, like an arranged marriage. All right, perhaps that's going a bit too far. It's really a bit more Charlotte than Emily. A serious introduction to a proper boy, then." She carefully moved Snowball so she could give Nana a good petting too. "I thought Peter Pan was the proper boy for me, but all I have is a shadow of him." She paused for a moment, wondering if that sounded too dramatic. "But I really did think he was going to come back, Nana. At least to fetch his property. It's his shadow, for heaven's sake. What is he going to do without it?" She went to the dresser and opened the drawer and regarded the black non-object that lay there, unmoving, darkening the shapes under it. "He mustn't need it anymore," she said thoughtfully. "He mustn't want it anymore," she added after another moment. Nana let out a sound somewhere between a growl and a cuff, almost like she knew what Wendy was thinking. Wendy herself wasn't sure what she was thinking. An idea was just beginning to form in her head. An extremely alien idea, but one that opened a space in the clouds even before it was fully formed. Like a sigh that precedes great things. Hi, Pinky. Things that did not include Ireland. Acquiring these things would be tricky. However, apart from maths, nothing in Wendy's life was strictly transactional. Though, certainly there were times when the boys were younger that she'd had to divide time into 5-minute slots so each could have a turn playing with a favorite toy. And of course, she often overheard Mr. Darling going on about how if Mrs. Darling bought a new hat, they wouldn't be able to afford a new tea service. And her mother, calmly agreeing, to her father's never-ending surprise, for she was practical underneath her lashes and perfume and quite good at math. But the idea of worth, of trade, of something having value to someone else in a way that was useful to her, to Wendy. This was new and a little frightening. Here are the facts. Peter Pan didn't value his shadow anymore, apparently. But someone else might. No, scratch that. Someone else did. She wouldn't let herself think beyond this. She wouldn't let her mind chatter the way her mouth did, ruining everything. This time, she would do. She looked around until she found the perfect thing, a delicate linen and lace envelope for keeping her nightgown in that she had done a pretty job of embroidering. She carefully scooped up the shadow, folded it, and slipped it in. What else might she need? A sewing kit, a tiny lady's knife, a muffler, a half-dozen extra hairpins, some string, and ribbons. She put all this along with the envelope into a worn leather satchel and slipped it under her bed. Then she took out a pair of stockings and began to darn them. An innocent and useful task should anyone come upon her unexpectedly. Hours later, Michael and John returned home, full of their usual youthful energy and droll remarks. Wendy neither remonstrated them nor laughed softly. Her brothers remarked on her distracted nature. When Mrs. Darling came into the kitchen, it was with a tentative step and fugitive looks. "How is your little pet?" she eventually asked. "What?" "Oh, he's absolutely adorable," Wendy said, remembering to toss Snowball a tidbit of mutton. For Nana, she reserved the bone. "You can take him with you, to Ireland. He would be a delightful little travel companion." For a moment, just a moment, Wendy looked at her mother, really looked at her, steadily and clearly. "You would never send the boys away." The statement fell hard and final and full of more meaning than anything that had ever been said in the kitchen before. "But they didn't write the fantasies," her mother said quietly. Then Mr. Darling came in, loud and blustery, talking up Irish butter and clean country air. Mother and daughter both ignored him. Wendy went to bed early that night, claiming fatigue. Since the sun had almost won its daily siphon battle with the weather, the sky was light a long time before the air became heavy enough to subtly infiltrate thoughts with sleep. "Look," she whispered, finally drowsing. "I have his shadow." ramifications. Wendy woke as the clock told midnight. If she had any doubts about the reality of her situation or the rashness of her escape plan, this clarified it all immediately. Of course, midnight, the witching hour. A foggy memory of instructions whispered to her in dreams guided Wendy's hand through the act of slipping on her boots and lacing them up, of wrapping herself up in a coat and grabbing her satchel. She tiptoed down the hall. She tiptoed down the hall, pausing to look into Michael and John's room. They were both peacefully asleep. John's glasses hung precautiously from the headboard above him, and a book was slipping out of his arms. Michael had fallen unconscious with the force of a tot. Immediately and completely. No book, and he hadn't moved from that position at all. Goodbye for a little while, at least, she whispered. You have your own adventures now. It's my turn this time. Despite attempting to be a ladylike sister, Wendy knew just as well as the boys were their squeaky stairs were and how to hold on to the banister and silently swing to a more polite step. Mr. Darling was snoring. The house was otherwise silent, and she had a clear path to the back door. Except for Nana, who sat resolutely in front of it. Now, Nana, Wendy whispered, if you really loved me, you would let me go. Nana made a sound of doubt in the back of her throat. Nana, I am not going to Ireland. Michael and John don't need either one of us anymore. You need a safe, warm, loving home and a good fire. I need something else. Nana's doggy eyebrows raised plaintively. She whimpered a question. Well, all right, I'll tell you. So that if anything happens to me, you may tell the authorities. I'm making my way to Neverland. Nana sighed, as to say, I wish I had never grabbed that shadow. Then she slowly stepped aside, gestured at the door with her head. Well, there it is. Go on. Thank you for understanding, Wendy said, kissing her on the forehead. I'm grateful. She opened the door the smallest crack. Able to slip through sideways, wasted away with love and longing. She whispered spitefully, stupid John and his stupid Ovid. She drifted down the walk carelessly for a moment, stunned by the night. The moon had come out, and though not dramatically full or a perfect crescent, its 3/4 were bright enough to turn the fog and dew and all that had the power to shimmer a bright silver. And everything else, the metal of street lamps and gates and cracks in the cobbles, a velvety black. After a moment, Wendy recovered from the strange beauty and remembered why she was there. She padded into the street before she could rethink anything and pulled up her hood. Why didn't I do this earlier? She marveled. Sneaking out when she wasn't supposed to was its own kind of adventure, its own kind of magic. London was beautiful. It felt like she had the whole city to herself except for a stray cat or two. Despite never venturing beyond the neighborhood, much by herself, she had spent plenty of time with maps, studying them for someday adventures. And as all the roads lead to Rome, so to do all the major thoroughfares wind up at the Thames. Names like Vauxhall and Victoria and Horse Ferry sprang from her brain as clearly as if they were been signs in the sky pointing the way. Besides lost boys and pirates, Wendy had occasionally terrified her brothers with stories about Spring Hill Jack and the half-animal orphan child with cat-like eyes who roamed the streets at night. As the minutes wore on, she felt her initial bravery, despite and terror slowly creep down her neck, along with the fog, which was also somehow finding its way under her coat, chilling her to the core. If I'm not careful, I am liable to catch a terrible head cold. Perhaps that's really why people don't venture out in London at night, she told herself sternly, chasing away thoughts of crazed, daggering, wielding murderers with a vision of ugly red runny noses and cod liver oil. But was it safer to walk down the middle of the street, far from shadow corners where villains might lurk? Being exposed out in the open meant she could be more easily seen by police or other do-gooders who would try to escort her home. My mother is sick and requires this one particular tonic that can only be obtained from the chemist across town, she practiced. A nasty decoction of elderberries and slippery elm, but it does such wonders for your throat. No one else has it, and you know how hard it is to call for a cab this time of night. In this part of town? That's the crime? Really? In less time than she imagined it would take, Wendy arrived at a promenade that overlooked the mighty Thames. She had never seen it from that particular angle before, or that time of night. On either bank, windows of all the more important buildings glowed with candles or gas lamps, or even electric lights behind their icy panes. Little, tiny yellow auras that lifted her heart. I do wish I had done this before, she breathed. Maybe if she had, then things wouldn't have come to this. She bit her lip. A decision had been made. It was time to follow through with it. There was no room for weakness or second thoughts in a hero, and if nothing else, Wendy had to be the hero of her own soul. She found the closest set of stairs down to the river and descended lightly, keeping an eye out for thugs and cutthroats. There was no one around at all, no one visible anyway, except for a suspicious old man in a broken top hat sucking on a pipe on the opposite bank. She stood at the edge of the turgid black waters and waited. A breeze rose, curling the little hairs that strayed from Wendy's chin. She realized with a start that the air now had a sharp tang of salt of the sea. The wispy fog that had seemed to follow her from home was now joined by its big brother, which swept down the river like a swift, dark carriage. Thick tenders preceded it, scraping this way that just above the water, as if feeling a clear path for the billows that followed. In a very short time, Wendy was once again surrounded by gray. She couldn't even see the stairs up to the road. Everything was still. And then, emerging out of the darkness like a wrath, a single yellow light bobbed in the inky distance. Slowly and steadily, it grew closer. Wendy sucked in her breath. The light resolved into a lantern hung on a yoke. No, not a yoke. A prow? Incredibly, unbelievably, a silent galleon glided down the Thames towards her. Its sails were furled and its masses thin and bare as the bones of a broken rib cage rotting on some ancient forgotten battlefield. The ship paused improbably in the currents. Nothing moved in the foggy night but a single black flag rippling in the salty breeze. Its skull and crossbones faded in yellow. Wendy forced herself to stand still, waiting as motionlessly as she could, her heart pounding loudly in her ears. She had made her decision. Wendy forced herself to stand still. Oh, wait, hold on. She had made her decision. She had taken an action. These were the results, and she could deal with them. Well, came a voice from the deck. Then came the measured clops of surprisingly hard and high-heeled boots on the planks, approaching the railing. Wendy gritted her teeth. Captain Hook leaned over and grinned at her. He was exactly and precisely the way she had remembered him. Long, black, ridiculously curly locks, probably a wig. Long face, clear of dissolution of rum, but ruined by the joint devils of villainy and insanity. He obviously thought himself a duke in a red and gold coat, prim breeches, and mostly spotless stockings. A feather stuck out of his oversized hat. A Jacobin collar throttled his neck. Above his smile was a mustache, waxed and styled to within an inch of its probably dyed life. Yet, Wendy gulped. Seeing him was different from remembering him. He looked utterly absurd, and that was exactly what made him terrifying. Ah, Miss Darling. How are you on this fine night? He called, saluting her with his hook. Sharp and golden, the only thing that glittered in the dim light of the solitary lantern. Very well, thank you, Wendy shouted back. Manners stepped in, bless them, when the mind scrambled away to hide. And you? Oh, I couldn't be better. Thank you for asking, he answered with an oily smile. That is, assuming you have brought what you said you would. I have it. I have Peter Pan's shadow here. She took out the satchel and showed it to him. Oh, excellent, excellent girl. Any pretense of politeness, any mockery he exhibited, disappeared entirely as vascular excitement took over. The greed on his face was both reassuring and nauseating. He rubbed his hand and Hook together with tangible glee. Do we have a deal? Wendy asked, clearly and loudly. Yes, of course. Passage to Neverland in return for one shadow. And home again, Wendy pressed, when I wish to return. And passage home again, Hook said impatiently. Yes. As for when you wish to return, that can be a tricky business. Getting here, without pixie magic or flight, is an uncertain thing. My crew wasn't too keen on the idea to begin with. That was the deal. Neverland and home again, Wendy said, pulling the satchel away from his view and making as if to put it back in her coat. Of course, Hook said desperately, eyes never leaving the satchel. Neverland and home again, without question. Just be aware that we are not some sort of ferry service, Miss Darling. We are pirates. With limited magical means, you cannot on a whim decide you've missed Mummy and Daddy long enough and expect to be transported instantly. These things take time. All right, I will take that into due consideration, Wendy said. Otherwise, promise. Oh, I promise. Swear by pirate's code. Hook looked as exasperated. Wendy put her hands on her hips. She knew about boys trying to sneak out of promises. She had 2 younger brothers who had been very specific with your orders and wishes, or they were as wily and untrustworthy as evil genies. And what was a pirate really but a boy grown with a real sword and mustache? Swear it, she repeated. She could have sworn she heard muffled laughter from behind him on deck. Hook sighed. All right. I swear on pirate's code, I, Captain Hook, promise that in return for Peter Pan's shadow, I shall grant Wendy Darling's passage to Neverland and home, when circumstances allow it. All right, then, Wendy said, trying to sound sure. Then she felt. She had just won a battle of wits with a pirate, just like in a story. Why didn't she feel triumph? Come on, men. Let's welcome our passenger aboard. Hold on, I don't know my battery's dying. There we go. Hook grinned again at her, a smile that narrowed to points at the corners of his mouth that were as sharp as those at the ends of his mustache, as the end of his hook. There was a thumping and pounding on the deck. A rope ladder unrolled over the side, bumping and bouncing on its way down, the last step landing neatly at Wendy's feet. She took a deep breath, set her jaw, and climbed up. That's no way that's the next chapter. That chapter looks like a doozy. Do you guys want one more chapter? That one's pretty. Hey CJ, the next chapter is 1, 2, 3, 4. The next chapter is 27 pages. That's crazy. Okay. Let me wet my throat because we've read 2 chapters. We've read 2. Hi CJ, Mr. Andrew Cosplay, long time no see. That next chapter is really long. If you need to refill your drink or go to the bathroom really quick, you guys can do that. We'll give you guys a couple minutes and go ahead and do that. And then we'll go ahead and jump into the doozy of a chapter. It's going to be a really long 27 pages for a chapter. That's crazy. $27 pages for a chapter? What are they thinking? We'll read one more, but if you need to go to the bathroom, let's go ahead and get a bathroom break really quick, or if you need a drink. You guys doing okay? You guys still awake? You guys still with me? I saw a bunch of people jump in and I feel bad that I can't say hi. Oh. Hold on, I'm trying to double check something. I want to make sure I spell this right. Everybody got quiet. Did everybody fall asleep on me already? Dude, thank you for tapping that screen. Blaze, hi, beautiful. Long time no see. Thank you for the heart. Me and the team bracelets. Let's go. We are reading What If Wendy First Traveled to Neverland with Captain Hook, A Twisted Tale. It's about to get good. Wendy just boarded the ship with the pirates and Captain Hook. We're going to get Wendy's side of this. I haven't been awake early enough to catch the Star Morning Lives. My ass gets kids ready up for school and then goes back to sleep. Did everybody go to sleep already on me? Did I make 7 people go night-night already in this last hour and a half? Empathetic Tiger, are you still awake? CJ. Beamer. You guys still awake? You guys still with me? Hey, Keith. No, you're still here. Emily, I know you are. You're on the edge of your seat for this book. You're on the edge of the seat for this book. Hi, Petrie. It's just the next chapter is a doozy, so I just want to make sure everyone had a potty break and able to get a drink. Let me give my eyes a break for a second. I need different glasses, though. They're working, just not as good as they used to. I think everybody else fell asleep already. I didn't do it. It wasn't me. All right, let me go get a drink and I will be right back. And then we'll get started on the next chapter. Ooh, without tipping shit over. Oh, I didn't mean to hit you in the face. I'm sorry. Oof. Oof, oof, oof. Eek. Okay. And Mad King, welcome. Petrie, welcome back. All right. Hey, Smooth. Okay, out of the 8 people in here, who is still awake? Lucky, are you still awake? Beamer, I know CJ's still here. Emily checked in. Petrie checked in. Tiger, are you still awake? I'm reading people to sleep. Do still awake. I see Do tapping that screen. Okay, I need Blades back in here. Let me see if I can get Blades back in here. I need to ask him a question really quick. Okay. I talk people to sleep. People be loving my deep voice. Yeah, see, Sunday nights I read bedtime stories. I need Blades. Where's Blades? I need Blades. Because my dad said the name sounds familiar. I forgot what his rate was. Blades, I need you. I think his name's Brian. Yes, we are currently reading What If Wendy First Traveled to Neverland with Captain Hook. Straight on Till Morning, A Twisted Tale. I said his name was Brian, right? Brian Blades. Brian. Brian, where'd you go? Brian. I can't tell you. I guess I look so much like Dad. He asked me if I was a child or in a family with the Wellborns. He knew who Dad was, and I look so much like Dad. I met him a couple days ago, actually, in one of my TikTok lives. TikTok is a small world, you guys. I'm just saying. Dad says the name sounds familiar, but I don't remember what his rate was. Corpse. All right. We're getting comfortable for the next chapter. The next chapter is 27 pages, so get comfortable. Get comfortable. The next one's a doozy. Don't know right now. Wendy, among the pirates. As might have been guessed from the preceding pages, Wendy hadn't much experience interacting with the world at large. That is, People who weren't her family, shopkeepers, neighbors, or other audience members at the theater. Yet despite the innocence, she had immediate sense that perhaps these pirates were not the nicest people to be left alone with. It was one thing to tell tales of swashbuckling battles and the backstory behind the bosun with her eye patch, and quite another to actually be in their mindset. Captain Hook presented his men with a flourish. They stood neither in neat rows nor attention, with very little respect at all, actually, and beheld Wendy far too boldly for her liking. One skinny chap with large gold earrings, who slouched provocatively to one side, actually gave her an appalling wink. Their clothes were not bright primary colors of nursery room imagination. They were salt-faded and dull. Their faces weren't merely unshorn and artfully streaked with a dab of tar. They were grubby. All shades of skin were dulled with not enough washing. Wendy found her hands twitching. The urge to grab a cloth and scrub them almost overwhelmingly all other thoughts. Men, this is Wendy, darling. Wendy, this is me, Crew. Crew, she is a guest aboard the Jolly Roger, and I expect you swabs to treat her as such. It's bad luck to have women aboard, one large old pirate with a red bandana growled. Worse than a cat. Brings storms and swells. Oh, I think it's the best sort of luck to have a lass on deck, a man with one eye and a loathsome leer grinned at her distinguishingly. If any one of you touches her, Captain Hook said with a very false smile, you'll be feeding the sharks before you can draw your next breath. He leaned on his heels and put his hand on his hip, a movement that threw his splendid jacket back and revealed the twin pistols that were holstered elegantly on his hips. This made Wendy feel a lot calmer, but a little vexed. What if the pirate was saving her life, or wanted to arm wrestle? What then? This whole thing is a bloody waste of time, a third pirate scoffed. We should be out attacking ships, looting gold, and plundering treasure. And so we shall. But in the meantime, she has given me something more valuable than all the gold in Neverland. Hook said airily. Peter Pan's shadow. He unfurled the poor limp thing and flapped it out to show them. The shadow hung limply from its neck where the pirate held it, struggling only a little. The pirates looked mostly unhappy at the sight, a smidgen angry, and not just a little uncomfortable. Seeing a shadow hanging there apart from its owner was unnatural and might make the hardiest and blackest soul shiver. But even Wendy could see there was more to it than that. And what will that get us? Demanded an orange-haired lout with a Northern European accent. Why, it will get us Hook paused, with a not very subtle side eye at Wendy. It will get us something we've always wanted. Well, something I have always wanted. And I am your captain, so it's what you want to, or at least it's in your best interest to want it. And when I have it, we will be done with Neverland and all its silliness forever. And there will only be plundering and loot from here on out. All right? There were muttered grumbles and grudging assent. For now, I'm putting the shadow in safekeeping in the trusted hands of Mr. Smee. As this, the pirates looked even more uncomfortable and disgusted, probably resigned. They threw up their hands and slowly disappeared, growling and unsatisfied and muttering curses. "So there you are, my dear," Captain Hook said, bowing to her. "A loathsome lot, to be sure, but you're safe among them while we're on our way to Neverland." "What time shall we get there, if you please?" Wendy asked politely. "We don't deal with time or clocks or watches on the Jolly Roger, Miss Darling, except for figuring latitude and longitude. Pirates are free from such civilizing constraints and demonic inventions of man. We have none of those infernal contraptions on this ship, I can tell you." Wendy narrowed her eyes. What a strange thing to say. And there was a strange look behind his bluster. Fear? Could it possibly have been fear? He was afraid of something. Something he wasn't telling her. "All right. Well, approximately how long will it take to get there? Surely pirates aren't entirely free from passage of time. What with meals and sleep and the like?" "Oh, you're a very clever girl, aren't you, Miss Darling?" "Well, these things aren't precise, but it shouldn't be more than a day or so." "And how are we to get there?" Captain Hook gave her a knowing smile. "I suppose if you were with Peter Pan, he would say something like, 'Oh, second star on the left,' etc., etc., and you would fly through the sky straight to the island of your dreams." "Alas, my lady, pixie dust and good magic are rather out of a pirate's reach. We had to go a different route." "And it nearly cost poor Major Thomas his life, possibly his soul. It was a bit unclear. Anyway, he's a useless lumber and prone to grog. Not much of a loss there." Wendy's eyes widened, and her hand went to her mouth in dismay. But Hook was already touching his hat to her and spinning away. "Joker." Chuckling over the shadow he held. Now alone, she looked around the deck nervously. There were no benches or chaise lounges on the proper transport vessel. Because of the lateness or the earliness of the hour, the pirates mostly went below decks to their bunks. None of those remaining seemed particularly happy about the strange motion of the ship, gliding along without oars or sails or any human help at all. They occupied themselves with other piratey pursuits: five-finger fillet on an unturned barrel, superstitious sips from leather flasks, shouting over a game that involved rolling with what looked very much like knucklebones instead of dice. And how were those come by? Wendy wondered. She fidgeted with her finger a bit the way she did at parties, and then decided that the dice throwers seemed the least dangerous. "My, those are certainly unique implements you're playing with," she ventured. The pirates just grunted. "Of course, I don't approve of gambling at all, but Father has a lovely pair of dice that he keeps with his jewelry. They're not bones. At least I don't think so. I believe they're ivory. Although I suppose that's basically a sort of bone, isn't it?" The pirates frowned and tried to ignore her. "They have real pipes on them, and carved and painted. They really are quite lovely, of course." Wait, where did I go? They really are quite lovely, of course. I'm against gambling, and so is Mother. It's not a proper occupation for anyone, even men. But his dice are quite pretty and nice to hold. They warm up in your hand so. And how do you know which side yours lands on? Without pipes. The pirates stopped their game entirely and stared up at her in exasperation. Well, I've never played before, she said, a little defensively. I'm not asking you to teach me. I'm just wondering. I should have to say no if you asked me, wouldn't I? Seeing as gambling and games of chance are immoral, so please, I'd rather you didn't ask. Weren't going to, one of the pirates grumbled. And with that, he swept the dice up into his bag and left her alone with the other players, who gave her nasty looks before they too retreated. Wendy wilted. Life aboard the pirate ship was actually surprisingly similar to a fancy party, the type she hated, with dressed-up girls and boys and men and women and tea and tiny sandwiches, and a speck of someone showing off on the piano. No one wanted to talk to her at those gatherings either. It was like Christmas, all over again. She wandered forlornly across the deck and looked out over the railing. The sky was blank. Fog surrounded the ship, and there was no more breeze. It was as if they had reached the middle of the night, the middle of nowhere. Everything stood still except for a few tendrils of Wendy's hair and the black flag. She shivered, pulling her coat more closely around her. She didn't want to be alone, but the five-finger fillet players looked dangerous. And then Wendy saw salvation. A lone pirate was sitting cross-legged on the deck, looking squinty-eyed and studious, pulling at a string on his pants. He was sewing. Wendy brightened like the sun. Now there was a subject she could feel confident about. She walked up to a fellow and watched for a moment as he ineffectively stabbed a giant needle into a piece of cloth that he held awkwardly in place of his pants, trying to cover a hole. "Excuse me, if you don't mind me saying, but I'm afraid you're doing that entirely wrong," Wendy said politely. The pirate looked up at her, one eye still squinted. She wondered if it was a permanent affliction. "Well, I ain't got me a seamstress to fix up my fancy pants now, do I?" he cackled. "What mother can't do, sons must make do, as they say." I don't know about that," Wendy said, trying to work the words out of her head and failing. "But you'll hand it to me. I'll have a go." The pirate's eyes widened. Without a second thought, he shoved the whole mess over to her, including his pants, which, as his brightly striped knickers attested, he had apparently not been wearing. "Oh," Wendy blushed, turned around. The pirate cackled again. "What, you think I'm stick it with a needle while it's on my own skin? I'm unskilled, not daft, you silly Now settle down. You can't see me privates, or me bum, and then that wear less on washing day around here. You'd get used to it." "Well?" Wendy tried to rearrange her shocked expression while busying herself sorting through the mess of cloth. He was right, of course. She was in an alien country now, a ship full of uncivilized men. All she could do was act properly, like a decent civilized person, as there was no guarantee that others would. She settled herself down on a tipped-over quarter cask and smoothed out the pieces. Actually, the pirate had made a very nice, neat little knot to begin with. But that made sense, she supposed. Oh, excuse me. Sailors had to be very good at knots, hadn't they? She bet they would be excellent at macrame or even crochet, if patiently taught. Wendy whistled and hummed to herself and felt much better with something familiar in her hands. In a short while, the patch was finished and held tightly on by tiny and neat little stitches. There, all done. You can see how Oh, there was a crowd around her now. Pirates speechless and wide-eyed to a man. Blimey! Do mine next, one said, wiping off his shirt. No me, I got no seat on my trousers, another begged. No, me next, whined a third. All right now. She put her hands on her hip, feeling crowded and overwhelmed. It was on the tip of her tongue to say that as long as she was on board, she would do any minor repairs and mending that were needed. Might as well make herself useful, right? That's what she always did. She made herself useful, and as a result, she was always needed and liked. Then again, she had paid her passage on this vessel, a very dear one. She wasn't a scullery maid. She was a customer. My jacket's fearful cold when the wind blows. I'll give you half a penny if you do it first, a fourth pirate said slyly, seeing her hesitate. The others caught on fast. I'll give you me grog ration for me pants. I'll give you half a whalebone needle and carve you a thimble if you like. Can you make things too? Like a muffler for cold days? Well, that's better, Wendy decided. I think. Pirates were very transactional and seemed to respect you more if you were as well. In some ways, it was rather a windfall. Who knew what other supplies she would require on her foray into Neverland? In her dreams and stories, there was always just the right-shaped stick or a rock or a key discovered at the last possible moment. But was the real Neverland like that? And of course, the pirates would have to talk to her now. Take that she bows, thought Wendy, very pleased with herself. There was no sun to mark the passage of time. After her third mending project, Wendy began to grow restless. She asked the hovering pirates the precise o'clock, but they all shook their heads. Without a sun, you can't use no sundial, one said, pointing to the dark gray wall of fog around the ship. And Hook don't allow no mundrum clocks nor watches nowhere on account of the crocodile what took his hand. It talks like a clock it swallowed. Aha, now it made sense. She had called her creature Tick-Tock in her own telling of the story. Hook's hand had given the beast a craving for more of the pirate captain, and it followed the Jolly Roger everywhere. The noise of the clock it had swallowed always presaged its appearance. The boys would shriek with glee when Wendy said things like, "But wait, what was that? Off in the distance. Tick-tock, tick-tock. It's a crocodile," young Michael would cry. That thing hasn't been around for years, another pirate said. Probably dead from indigestion. But Hook, he still thinks it's out there. Somewhere. He can't bear being reminded of it. Thinks the beast is still after him. A third. Every time he hears a clock, it drives him batty. She wondered what had happened to the crocodile in the real Neverland. She hadn't killed it off in her own stories yet, but despite the lack of clocks, lunch came anyway. And blessedly just in time, Wendy's stomach was growling in a most unladylike way. She followed the crew to the mess hall. Each pirate presented his own bowl to the Ursol chef. It was then filled with glop that might have been a chowder or a Mollington way. One polite fellow, whose waistcoat Wendy had fixed, offered to give her his own bowl once he was done. She discreetly tried to wipe it out. The tall, slouchy pirate with the two big old earrings saw this and cackled. "Have you anything of your own you would like fixed?" Wendy asked him, trying to change the subject and distract attention from her covert actions. "Oh, I'm plenty handy with a needle and thread," the pirate said, posing for her. And in fact, he wore more solidly dressed than the rest. Everything was mostly clean, if not perfect, and unpatched. "I just don't let it get out too much. Know what I mean?" "I suppose I do," Wendy said uncertainly as the pirate winked at her. "The name's Zane," he said with a bow. "Alden Zane, at your service." Wendy, darling, at yours," she said with a curtsy. "Miss Darling, what are you doing in here with these louts?" Captain Hook was suddenly filling the door like a bad omen and roaring like an enraged lion. At her dismay and the other pirate's shock, he immediately softened his voice. "My dear, you're a guest, not a midshipman. Come dine in my quarters. Mr. Smee will serve us." Wendy shivered. She might have read a few books that were not strictly approved by father or pre-screened by the bookseller. In those typeset pages, she had a glimpse of the greater world. Even if she didn't fully understand it, she knew it was not proper to be alone in the company of a strange man. "Diana worry," Zane whispered into her left ear. "He's not... Hook's a lunatic, but he loves decorum. Your maidenhood is safe with him. Not your throat, maybe, but the rest of you is." "Thank you," Wendy whispered back. Then she returned the bowl to the pirate who had provided it. "Thank you, sir, but I suppose I will be dining on the Lido deck instead. Your generosity is very much appreciated." "Oh, yes, me too." "Absolutely, ma'am," the pirate blustered, bowing. Lunch with a pirate captain could have been many things terrifying, spooky, embattled, even romantic, given the right circumstances. But in reality, lunch was awkward. Wendy sat up properly and used her best manners. Captain Hook bowed and flourished and removed his hat and pulled out a chair for her. The table was a tiny fold-out thing spread with a fancy cloth, silver utensils, and a clever golden candelabrum that was held upright on chains so it didn't tip with the waves. It was all very lovely, and for the moment, Wendy was overcome with a precise perception of the scene. There was even a spinet piano in the corner of the room. "I do play, if you're wondering," Hook said, following her eyes. "A bit harder since Hook. But I make do." They settled down on empty plates. "Mr. Smee," Hook called politely. No one came. "Mr. Smee," he said again with a growl, while still smiling at Wendy. Silence. "Mr. Smee," the captain finally cried, slamming his hook down on the table. "Blast that man. He'll be at the grog again. no doubt. He leapt up and crashed through the door, muttering under his breath, "Confounded, lazy, overpaid." Wendy sat stiffly and continued to look around at everything she had already looked at. Eventually, Hook came back, awkwardly carrying a plate of carved beef, a bowl of neeps and tatties, and a beautiful, if stale-looking baguette, all cradled in his hand, and Hook. Wendy leaped up to help, but he tisked her back down and actually quite neatly and definitely laid out the feast. "Good help is so hard to get," he said apologetically. "I should have had him walk the plank years ago, but we go way back. He's even saved my life a few times. It's like keeping an old dry cow around because you can't bear the look in her eyes." "Oh," Wendy said uncertainly. They concentrated on serving themselves in silence. Wendy wondered if this was what having a distant uncle was like. An old, grown-up who didn't know how to interact properly with young people, and who often said inappropriate things. "So I'm curious, Miss Darling," Hook finally began, with a casual tone so false Wendy's ears practically curled at his words. "Whatever made you come to the rather rash decision to trade Peter Pan's shadow to his greatest enemy in exchange for passage to Neverland?" Wendy was about to interrupt and point out that Hook wasn't Peter Pan's greatest enemy. Depending on how you looked at it, Peter Pan's greatest enemy could have been growing up, his own sense of self-importance, or his more immediately dangerous foes, the warlike, winged Lilac, the Fangraders of Upper Hillsdale, or the Cyclops of the Caroline Sea. Hook was a recurring enemy, not his greatest enemy. Then she thought better of mentioning it. "Well, you know, he never came back for it. He just left it there," she said airily, trying to ignore the agency she had in the decision that she had done wasn't right. That these words were false. "What was I supposed to do? Keep it around for the rest of my life among my trinkets and bric-a-brac? Hanging after me? You seem to want it more than he, and I wanted a little holiday. Everyone is happy. Shall I pour you some water, Captain?" "Thank you, my dear. But I'll stick to this lovely Barlow. A very interesting justification. Maybe?" "Now, don't look at me like that. It's just us, Miss Darling. But surely you of all people know that Neverland is a bit trickier than that. There is no holidaying there. Like Blackpool or the south of France, you made quite the commitment. I can't help but wonder what drove such a pretty, innocent little thing like you to such desperation, abandoning her life and family to leap into the unknown and trading in her hero shadow for the process." Wendy had mixed feelings at these words. On the one hand, they made her sound a little epic. On the other hand, her life was really that dire. Her family loved her. Nana loved her. Ireland was terrible. But it was for only a short period of time, right? And safe? She looked up at the pirate, suspicious in her stories. Captain Hook was always planning, always convening. He had an angle on everything, even if that angle was stupid and resulted in ridiculous defeats. So what was he driving at now? "Yes, it shall make a fascinating chapter." Yes, it shall make a fascinating chapter in my memoirs, won't it? She said as haltingly as she could, pouring herself another glass of tar-scented water. Won't your family miss you? The Mr. and Mrs. Darling? I really don't know how time operates between Neverland and the real world. Perhaps I'll just have been gone a day, she answered carelessly. Perhaps it will be a blink of an eye. Perhaps this is all now a dream, and I will wake when it's over, back in my bed. Either way, Mother and Father have their hands quite full with Michael and John. I dare say they shan't miss me beyond needing to write an embarrassing explanation to a certain family in Ireland. I just hope Nana remembers to feed Snowball. But what about you, Captain Hook? What exactly are your plans for Peter's shadow? Are you going to keep it and hold it over his head forever in return for your Hook? Forever? Hook sat back in his chair, looking astonished. Oh, no, my girl. I have no desire to continue this endless charade with Peter Pan any longer at all. I have wasted far too much of my life on it. My crew hasn't looted a merchant vessel or stormed a port in years. No, I am done with Neverland. Rather, permanently. I think it's high time I put it in Peter behind me, rather permanently. That sounds a bit ominous, Wendy observed. It was supposed to. I'm actually quite thrilled by the fact that you will be here as an audience to his and its fate. What precisely are you going to do, if I may ask? Well, my dear, unlike the villains in your quaint little tales, I'm not daft enough to reveal my cunning plans to anyone, a hero or even a bystander like yourself, before carrying them out. Wendy took some umbrage at the term bystander. Wasn't she on a pirate ship headed to Neverland of her own violation? Hi, Jamie. Didn't she invent much of the world he inhabited? But there were more pressing issues than her own ego. Of course not, she agreed, around a sip of water so she wouldn't choke on her subterfuge. But surely you couldn't keep such ideas entirely to yourself. Even a great captain like yourself needs help with the dirty work. And perhaps a sympathetic ear? Well, you are right there, of course, Hook said, swirling his deep red wine in its glass. But I have Mr. Smee, who holds all my secrets dearly. He alone is aware of not so happily ever after that awaits all of Neverland. And I'll have you know, Miss Darling, I was rather despairing of ever being able to carry out all the details needed for my plans. Your offer of Peter's shadow came like a miracle out of the blue. Finally, Mr. Smee and I can get to work on it. Wendy was, however, inadvertently responsible for setting in motion one of Hook's most murderous schemes that involved all of Neverland, rather permanently. She swallowed and tried to stay calm. Lucky break for you, I suppose, she said casually. But how does it involve Peter's shadow? You couldn't have made all these plans without knowing for certain you could get it. And... Tut, tut, the captain said, shaking his finger at her like a school marm. It's highly impolite to question a pirate captain so closely when he has invited you to lunch. Don't you know? Terribly bad form. And Wendy grounded her teeth, defeated. All right, I think we're going to stop there because I have a rather dry throat.